The snap part of this point is something which is also new. Metro-styled apps are required to snap. What does that mean? Well, you know, like in Windows 7, how there's that wonderful feature where you can like drag an application to the side of the desktop and it kind of connects to the side of the desktop. Really handy for having a side-by-side view of like maybe, you know, Visual Studio and Blend or something. Kind of the same idea in that we can, for lack of a better term, you know, dock or snap an application. But look at the difference. Okay, we can run a Metro-style app in its full state. The snap state is meant to almost be sort of like a subset of the UI, kind of distilled down to the bare pieces. So it's almost like a second view of your data, and of course that should ring out to you guys as MVVM, right? We can go ahead and leverage MVVM to have different views of our data. We can have a snap state and a full state. And it's meant to be a fully functional version of the whole application. You might have some, you know, pieces that the user can't see directly, but it's not like going to go into some kind of suspend mode. It's still a usable application, just not going to show all the UI pieces. And that's what this whole snap idea is. Now, of course, with every release of a new technology, we have to have oodles of new buzzwords. And one thing that you'll probably bump into is the idea of Windows 8 contracts. Okay, so this is, in one case, contracts are ways for Windows applications, Windows 8 applications, to communicate between themselves and share different services. And like, you know, I showed that screenshot earlier of searching in your app for something. Okay, well, that's just one tiny example. The Metro APIs, and I'll actually define that in a little bit. We have tons of predefined contracts that we can crack into, right? So, for example, if you were building up a Metro-style app, you could say, well, my application wants to tap into the share contract. So I have a uniform API to upload parts of my app to some kind of a social media site, for example, right? You might decide to tap into the search contract. Okay. Now, here is where you have lots of creativity. You know, you're not going to be required to use every contract that the OS supports. You kind of want to have the right tool for the job mindset. I've already mentioned this as part of pretty quick here, but these tiles, remember, these are meant to be alive. They are actually kind of consuming some CPU resources because they are going to typically be, you know, maybe pulling in data from an external site for updates, right? Like a rolling list of incoming emails or an update to the weather, okay? Now, that's not going to be the case, though, for a Windows 7 app installed under Windows 8, meaning a non-Metro app, right? So the tile for Visual Studio is not going to do anything. It's just going to look like an icon for Visual Studio. But if you are building a full Metro app, that's another thing to stay or to keep in mind and to consider, right? And we're almost done with these principles, then we'll start talking about some actual APIs, right? Cloud storage is going to be a big, big part, okay? Reason is because, remember, Windows 8 is meant to be runnable and usable on a super wide variety of devices. So if you write an app, and I download it to my PC, and I like it a whole bunch, and I also download it on my tablet, then no matter which device I'm using, ideally, of course, I'm hitting the same application data. So that's where we're going to be bumping into cloud-based services, right? So that's another thing that we're going to need to be jumping on board of, typically, to really kind of make a nice quality Metro-style app. And then also, the final little piece to just be aware of is that don't make the eye candy there for the heck of it, right? We're trying to make a pretty clean user experience, and that's, again, where tools like Blend can really help us, and possibly the services of a graphical artist. Now, let's get down to some more code bits. Okay. I mentioned earlier that if you're a .NET programmer today, you're going to have an excellent head start. Maybe even more specifically, if you're a .NET programmer who's worked with XAML before, you're going to have a really excellent start. So even though we can still work with XAML, C#, etc., we really are not building a prim and proper .NET application. We're building something called a Metro application, or modern UI application. So we have been given a whole new stack of libraries. Okay. In addition, though, we do get a subset of the .NET platform that we can use to build Metro-style applications. And here's a nice roll-off-your-tongue term for you, right? .NET APIs for Metro-style apps. Now that they changed Metro, I guess they'd probably call it .NET APIs for Windows 8-style apps. That seems to be the new term now for Metro. Okay. Now remember, this is a subset. So you cannot guarantee if it worked on the desktop, it's going to work under Metro. Right? Perfect example. When you're building out the user interface for a Metro-style app, you're not doing WPF proper. You're using XAML, and it's going to feel like a WPF in some cases with layouts and so on, but you actually are tapping into a whole different stack of libraries. Okay. So let's first talk a little bit about this little subset of .NET. It is definitely meant to be a lean and mean subset. Pretty much anything with UI pieces has been stripped out, controls and windows and layouts. Things are much, much more generalized, things like collections and link support and some core security libraries. Input support, right? So you see this guy down here for system.windows.input. So we do get support for all the touchscreen input, for example. Okay. And this little screenshot might be misleading because I think you might have seen this if you just go to MSDN. You might look up system.collections, but if you expand the node, you're going to see that it's actually a superset for a whole bunch of sub-items, right? So if you were to actually go through each one of those over here on the right, you'd see quite a number of different namespaces. Right? Now, all these different namespaces, they use system as the root, just like we're used to under .NET. Okay. But when it comes to all the pieces that are very particular to Windows 8, like the UI, the contracts, tapping into the cloud, tapping into the services, that is actually Windows Runtime. Okay? So this is, again, where we take a really hard turn from traditional .NET programming. And this is where we tap into a whole bunch of services of the runtime, a whole bunch of new APIs that are only usable from a Metro-style application. In fact, I can't even show you these on this machine because I have Windows 7 installed. So if I go back to Visual Studio 11, it doesn't even show me any of the Metro templates, right? Now, you will see some common naming conventions. So all these Windows runtime libraries, they just use Windows as the root namespace. Remember back over here on the .NET stack, we're going to use system as the namespace. Okay? So what kind of things do the Windows runtime libraries show us and give us? Well, plenty of ways to consume data in a whole variety of formats. Again, if you've worked with WCF before, some of this will look and feel familiar. We have a whole bunch of stuff for working with devices of the machine, right? So like geolocation. If you have a tablet, you can tap into different sensors, right? Tilt and so forth. We also have tons of different things for multimedia. Now remember, if you're going to be saying, yes, we are committed to Metro, you will be building eye candy. So the media namespaces are pretty useful. And that's obviously just a subset of what WinRT brings us.